Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe. Very thrilled to welcome JD Duran to the podcast today to talk about one of the big early 1973 releases, Save the Tiger, starring Jack Lemmon in an Oscar-winning role. How are we doing, JD?
Good. I'm doing real well. Thanks for having me. First time getting to talk with you in this specific space. I know we've talked on our show and recently on Chasing the Gold at InSession Film, but my first time here doing this with you.
Yep.
And this was a blind spot for me as well. So this was not only a great excuse to get back together with you, but then to see this film. So yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, thanks for being here. This was a blind spot for me. I was aware that Jack Lemmon had won an Oscar for Best Actor in the 70s for a movie that I think I was always messing up the title. I was calling it Save the Another Animal or something for years.
And I mean, really, it kind of works. It's regardless,
not,
right?
Yeah, I mean,
it's all metaphorical. So
this was not a big success at the box office. This kind of came and went. Opened in mid-February of 1973. More than a year later, Jack Lemmon is up against some really huge Titan heavyweight actors for Best Actor, and he wins, which we'll talk about later in our show. Before we get to Save the Tiger, though, JD, since this is your first time on the podcast on Film at 50, I'd love for you to talk about kind of what role has film played in your life, and if you have a few favorites you could share with us, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, like many cinephiles, I mean, film has been there to comfort me. And, you know, when I really needed some comfort, which is a lot of where InSession Film comes from, which we started almost 10 years now, back in 2013.
Wow.
And that was born out of a rough patch in 2012, even going back to 2011 a little bit, when I was looking to art and looking to perhaps, you know, shift my perspective of the world, which is what I love about art. I think that's what a lot of it is there for. And so the InSession Film was born out of that. And I've always been, a lover of film, obviously, even up until that point. But from there, it skyrocketed into a whole new stratosphere. And so film has always been there. And I don't know if it's always been the priority like it has over the last 10 years, but it's always been there as a comfort blanket and a way to think about and perceive the world and what shapes us and the relationships in our lives, which is what I love about it. And as far as some favorites, I mean, like, I look at my top 10 movies of all time, and there is a theme for sure. And I think some of it stems back to not just how we evolve as adults and how things shift from when we're a child to being an adult, but also thinking back at what childhood really means to us, the pure nature of being a child. I find profound when looking back at it as an adult. I think it's really the most important times in our lives, and not just because of the vulnerabilities of being a child. Obviously, everything around you when you're a kid shapes you, but there's also something about the simple innocence of it that I just look back at fondly. The joys of being a child, at least for many of us. I mean, obviously not the case for everybody, but for a lot of us, it's the most simple time of our lives. It's the most formative. And so I look at my favorite films of all time, and many of them, and this wasn't a conscious decision. I do love how this somewhat formed organically. It's just something that speaks to me. And I'm an emotional person. I wear my emotions on my sleeve. So when I am moved emotionally for one reason or another, that's a part of it as well. But my favorite film of all time is Citizen Kane.
Okay.
And maybe for not the same reasons as a lot of people, I don't know. Obviously, Citizen Kane is light years ahead of its time in terms of its editing and craft and structure. Or what Orson Welles was doing at that time was, inventive, very, very innovative. And I do love the film for that. But I think what's interesting about Citizen Kane, what I don't think is talked about enough, is that it's somewhat of a sleight of hand narratively and thematically. And that from a broader perspective, it's this movie about this wealthy man who owns this newspaper business and then wants to get into politics, and not everything starts to crumble around him by the end of the film. But all of that is a little bit of, I don't want to say a red herring, but it is a setup for a much more profound revelation by the end of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And that while he had everything that he wanted, ultimately what he yearned for the most was his childhood, something that the film slightly tells us was stripped from him. He didn't really have much of a childhood, especially with his parents. And there's a really gorgeous scene in the middle of the film that kind of sets that up. And so you get that reveal at the end, Rosebud, and I'm sure many of us know what that means. And it's a symbol of his childhood. Like, what he really yearned for more than anything else was to go back to the joy and the innocence of that time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about that at the end of his life, despite all of his successes and wealth, he didn't really care about any of that.
Mm-hmm.
What he cared about was something much more grand and majestic. And so that to me is what I was so truly moved by with Citizen Kane. So that to me is my favorite film of all time. Right behind it, I have The Tree of Life. I think is one of the most thematically rich and emotionally stirring experiences I've ever had. Also in my top 10, Grave of the Fireflies. Again, a movie coming from a studio, speaking of Ghibli, of course, that throughout its entire canon is all about examining the magic of childhood and all of these creative and fun ways. And Grave of the Fireflies is the anti-Ghibli film in that regard, in the sense that those characters don't get to experience the magic of childhood. It is in the most devastating ways possible taken from them. And so it becomes this incredible journey of trying to survive. And honestly, it's one of the best depictions of love I've ever seen. I think that's ultimately what I am moved by the most with that film as well. But then, there's classics like The Godfather, which is one of my favorite films of all time as well. 2001: A Space Odyssey. Who doesn't love that? So, I have a couple of, I guess, traditional picks in there that I really love. Vertigo is another one. Vertigo is a film that I think plays better now than it did when it came out.
Yeah, that is that's like his rare movie that seems to get better as the decades go on, right?
Especially in the digital age, right? Because you think about what Scotty does in that film, and it's all about turning a woman into a fantasy and then pursuing that to dangerous lengths, right? He falls in love with an idea.
Right.
And you think about that and how that translates to social media in the digital age and what we see in the media every day. And it's almost like Hitchcock could see the future, but didn't have the technology to depict what the future would look like. So he just did it in his own Hitchcockian way. But it very much taps into a lot of the horror that we see today and how men do fetishize and fantasize about these ideas and then pursue them to the to the point where there's cost to it all. So anyway, I'm rambling on, but
those are excellent choices. I love Citizen Kane. We did an 80th anniversary bonus episode last year for that film. We talked about talked about it with a pal, Forrest Hartman, for I want to say 2 hours. We went through that movie and just dissected it and just really went through why is this so important? Why is it so great? And it's just always a treat. Every few years I have to pop it on. I love watching it with Roger Ebert's commentary. He has an amazing commentary on that movie that always just makes me very happy. But as on its own, it's just such a brilliant film. And Tree of Life I chose as a divine double features film for that end segment. I want to say like a month or two ago. I love that movie too. Tree of Life is amazing.
Yeah, that was one of those movies where I immediately watched it. And at the time, so the first time I did not watch it in 2011 because of the aforementioned rough patch that I was going through
Oh,
during that era. So I caught up to it some years later. I was a new parent. My
mhm.
son was just recently born.
Okay.
Like he wasn't even 6 months, I don't think. So
Mhm.
I was like a real new father, and it hit me like a sledgehammer.
Mm.
And every time I've seen it since, and I've probably seen it 3 or 4 times in the last few years, and it just becomes all the richer and the more profound
Mhm.
in its ideas of nature and grace. And yeah, I mean, it's one of the more immensely textured films that I've seen. And it's interesting because, where a lot of people talk about this recent trend we've seen recently of these like semi-biographical films like the Fablemans and Spielberg and whatnot.
Mhm.
In a lot of ways, you can point back to the Tree of Life as the one that kind of kicked that off.
Mm. That's a good point.
Because that, was that for Terrence Malick in a way, and not obviously not directly, but in a way. And I don't know if Alfonso Cuarón kind of saw that and was inspired or what. But then comes Rome, and then and
Roma.
then it's just a snowball after that. So,
Yeah.
and here we are.
Yeah, whenever there's something thematically linked to a movie that's even just 3 or 4 years later, you're like, that filmmaker probably saw, like, at
Yeah,
least took
yeah,
a little bit of inspiration from
yeah, maybe a
that
little
other
bit. Yeah,
film. But yeah, Terrence
yeah,
Malick is amazing, and I'm so excited because we get to
yeah.
talk about his first movie in a few months.
Mm,
Badlands came out in the
yeah,
fall of '73, so we're getting to that in a few months' time. Have you seen
love it.
Badlands, his first movie?
Oh yeah. So on the podcast, I don't. It wasn't this last year. I think it was 2021. We did a
Mhm.
Terrence Malick
Oh,
movie
okay.
series, and
Mhm.
so we went through his entire filmography. And I mean, that was one of the most rewarding experiences we've ever had on the show. Yeah, go through all of those films. Really
even
great stuff.
even some of the post Tree of Life stuff, which is some
Yeah,
of it's
so
questionable.
I am a defender.
You're a
I
defend you
just
defend
love
those?
Mac. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm even a defender of those films. I admittedly not. They're not nearly as seamless. That is
Mhm.
Terrence Malick, maybe the most unhinged, for better or worse. But there's something about his style that I just find so evocative,
Mhm. Yeah, very
and
unique.
not song to song. Excuse me. Not song to song, but the one previously. The title is escaping me at the moment.
Knight of Cups.
Knight of Cups. What I find so intriguing about that is I think now Terrence Malick, if he ever heard this, might disagree, or he can correct me, but
If
my
Terrence Malick
interpret
heard this, I would be losing my shit.
but my interpretation of that was, it plays out like Luke 15 in the Bible. And we all
Mm.
know Malick is a spiritual filmmaker. So it wouldn't surprise me if he was very much inspired by that. And Luke 15 is the story of the lost son, that parable, that famous parable. And
Mhm.
and narratively, that is a lot of that movie. So I just find those rhythms
Mhm.
really, the way he forms it all within a modern setting, I just find incredible. So like it's certainly far from his best work, but I still find it intriguing. Like his style and the passion he puts into his stories are just, they're just really great. And then he comes back in a big way with, A Hidden Life a few years ago,
Mm.
which I
Mhm.
knocked me off my, that to me was classic Malick.
Yeah.
So I think he's starting to come back to that Tree of Life form, like
Right.
actually having at least some sort of narrative backbone.
Yeah,
Yeah, which
but
helps his movies.
he had an amazing start. His first two films are from the '70s.
Yes.
Days of Heaven is the other one. Like,
Mm-hmm.
since this podcast, it's not called, like, the word '70s is not in here, but because of what year we're in, we're going to be in the '70s for a long time. Like, what is your take on films of the 1970s? Do you like that decade, or is that a decade that means
Yeah.
a lot to you as a film lover?
Oh yeah. I mean, some of the best movies of all time, and many of the best movies of all time, I think, hail from that era.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about the late 60s and then getting into the 70s, you really see Hollywood forming into something completely new.
Yeah.
From what it was in the 40s and 50s. And you see filmmakers, taking these bold, ambitious risks that honestly, I don't even know if we see a lot of today, at least from a studio filmmaking perspective. Perhaps we're getting to that a little bit more with some films like Top Gun Maverick, for example, or maybe even Avatar: The Way of Water, as bombastic as that film is. But
but we knew those would do well, though. I would say like a movie like Babylon. Babylon's an example of a movie
that's maybe even
that's a roll of the dice from a studio to give $80 million to Damien Chazelle to make that movie and hope that they get their money back. That's
exactly
real roll of the dice.
100%. And in recent, these last few years, you do see most of those movies, the Babylons of the world, they just haven't translated well to the box office for one reason or another. Like, we're getting to the point where the successes of The Wolf of Wall Street, now, again, that's Scorsese, so maybe that's a bad example. But that's a movie that did fairly well financially.
Yeah, 10 years ago.
And isn't, it's not a superhero movie. It's not Avatar. It's not a legacy sequel. But the successes of those kinds of movies, we're really getting away from. And so in a way, I kind of understand why the studios are hesitant, but to, the point of this whole conversation, you look back at the 70s and the kind of risk that studios and filmmakers were taking. I mean, that was still fairly new. They weren't sure how audiences were going to react necessarily. And then of course audiences, show out for, the apocalypse nows of the world.
Yeah.
And even if maybe not immediately, over time, you certainly see those kind of films being embraced, allowing studios to then continue to take bigger risk, at least to some degree. So that's always what's fascinating about the 70s, is kind of that transitional phase. I mean, and obviously we as cinephiles, and we were rewarded for them taking those risks.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, 50 years on, it's really exciting. And this definitely is the transition phase. I would say like 73. I mean, we're not quite to Jaws yet. Things change after Jaws just explodes at the box office.
Yeah.
Between like 70 to 74, it's like we're getting a lot of cool kind of character pieces. Some movies do very well. The Godfather was a huge hit.
Yep.
And then in 73, the giant hit is The Exorcist. That comes out at the very end of the year. But we're not quite at the like blockbuster mentality yet. So studios are willing to, shell out a few million to directors to just make their personal projects. And Save the Tiger is a great example of a movie that I don't even know if it would have gotten funded a few years later. Like, this is like the time where a studio would say, okay, here's $1 million. Go make your little movie that we probably won't see a setback. And this movie was a big flop at the box office. No one really saw it.
Yeah. I mean, you think of Jaws, and that was 75, I believe.
June of 75.
And then just 2 years later, Star Wars hits.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, blockbuster filmmaking is off to the races. And so, then you get into the 80s, and there's obviously many examples there.
Yeah, it's a different mentality in the 80s. We still get some good character pieces, but not the kind we see in the 70s. It's a much more blockbuster mentality decade as the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. Like your taxi drivers, if you will, started to become less of a priority into the 80s. So
like Raging Bull was tough to like get that. That was right at the end. That was like 79, 80. And that was hard to get that. It was hard for Scorsese to get that made. Whereas it might have been easier 5 years before.
Exactly. A lot of it is just as kind of a timing of when these films can get greenlit. And that's what makes the 70s so fascinating, because even, when you talk about that transitional period, there are even phases to it. Now that we're having this conversation, I don't even know if I thought about that duality, but the late 70s had its own transition, because blockbuster filmmaking was obviously new at that time as well. So it's, that
franchise filmmaking was kind of unheard of outside of like James Bond.
Exactly.
That was like 100%. The only one.
Yeah, exactly. So, Yeah, I mean, regardless of how you rank the decades, I don't know, except maybe the '60s. '60s has some incredible movies there too,
Hmm.
but '70s I think is maybe the most fascinating to at least talk about
Yeah.
because of how it's kind of bridging the old guard with the new guard.
Yeah, I might have a few more favorites from the 90s because I was born in 84 and I grew up with
Yeah,
so many
same.
terrific
Yeah,
films. Like in the early to mid 90s, there's some favorites there. But like gun to my head, I think if I had to pick the best decade of film, it's the 70s. I just think like you can just get
yeah,
lost as I
same.
am on this podcast for however long I do this. I'm just getting lost in all of these
Yeah.
cool stories, many films for this I'd never seen before, including Save the Tiger. Had you heard of this movie at all before? Like, did you know of it?
I had heard of it,
Mm-hmm.
but I hadn't really done much to seek it out, if I'm
Yeah.
being perfectly honest. So you're just one of those films that had always kind of lingered there. And honestly, not something I've thought about in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
So very much out of sight, out of mind in that regard. Like I became familiar with this, quite some years ago. So when you brought it up to me, it was like one of those kind of light bulb things of, oh, I kind of remember that movie, but I've never seen it.
Right.
So this would be a great excuse, as I noted earlier. So
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I have my Oscar handbook here. The only place I'd ever really heard of this movie was in this book, and it's like, oh,
yeah.
that's Jack Lemmon's Best Actor win. But
Hmm.
this movie's pretty fascinating in that like Jack Lemmon and company wanted to make this for years, and it was really difficult to
Mm.
get financing. I found a quote online that said, Lemmon had championed the project against the better judgment of Paramount, who wanted nothing to do with what they considered to be a message picture and a downer. After 2 years of lobbying, Lemmon and the
Yeah.
director and the screenwriter were given $1 million to make it. To stretch the funds, Lemmon volunteered to work for Union Scale, which at the
Mm.
time was $165 a week, plus a percentage of the profits. So I don't think Jack Lemmon saw much money from this movie at all.
No, but he did get an Oscar out of it.
But he
So
got an
there's
Oscar out
that.
of it, which is not nothing. But
Yeah.
like you hear that like today, you hear that sometimes like where an actor took like they didn't take a big upfront salary, but they get a percentage of the profits. And if the movie is extremely profitable, then they see a lot of money.
Mhm.
But if
Do you?
they don't, if the movie tanks, then they don't usually see much.
Yeah. So here's a question for you, especially because this film is 50 years old. Do you think that it was a million? They gave him $1 million to make this movie, and it didn't
Mm-hmm.
do well at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think over those 50 years, with DVDs and rentals, that they've maybe made that money back over the course of 50 years?
I feel like $1 million isn't that much in
I don't think.
73 that you
Yeah,
think in the 80s and 90s with VHS with maybe later DVD, like maybe the movie did eventually make its money back since it had
yeah,
such
and
a small
streaming
budget.
now, like, because I'm sure it's like what,
Yeah,
$4 to rent this on
I paid my
Amazon.
$4 on
Yeah, yeah,
Amazon to
same.
watch it.
Yeah, same. So
So
I don't
someone's
know.
pocketing that money.
Yeah, I mean, I assume Paramount still has the rights to this movie.
Yeah,
So maybe over 50 years they got $1 million back.
possibly. I mean, I don't know how well is this movie doing at the video store in 87? Like, are a
Yeah,
lot of people
I don't
renting
know.
this?
I don't know.
Like
It just
Jack Lemmon had a really, I mean, Jack Lemmon, I want to say, has been famous since the 50s, and his
yes.
career kind of went up and down. But
Hmm.
he had a big resurgence in the 90s with Grumpy
He
Old
did.
Men and Out to
Yep.
Sea. And like he was like, if you look at his filmography, the last 5, 6 years of his career before he died in '01, like there's a lot of great stuff, a lot of like big, you know, popular titles between the early 90s to late 90s. So maybe there
Yeah.
was some later interest in Save the Tiger as his like big Oscar win movie. So
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I just think about in the streaming age where a new generation is seeking out older films, and Jack Lemmon is a name that people will know or come to know as their cinephiledom grows and matures.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I just kind of want, and because $1 million is through streaming, I think I would imagine somewhat easy to recoup,
Right.
versus something like Babylon, which is going to lose dozens of millions
Yeah.
of dollars.
Between the budget and the marketing, I can't
Yeah.
imagine that ever getting made back for Babylon.
Yeah,
But
Babylon, like if you throw that on Amazon for $5 a pop, that's gonna take 150 years.
yeah,
To
I
make
mean,
up
a
all
lot of
that
people are
loss.
going to rent it. Like a lot of people will stream
Yeah.
it and stuff. And I've seen people on Twitter like, I'm at my 8th viewing of Babylon.
Yeah.
Haters. And I'm like, I really liked Babylon. It's in my second 10. It's not my top 10. I don't know if I'd want to go see
Yeah.
it 8 times.
Yeah. I'm eager to see it again, but yeah,
It's
that
long.
movie's just, it's dead in the water. Like it's going nowhere. It can't make up $1 million. If it was just $1 million, sure, yeah. Give it.
I don't know
time,
how
but-
we could ever find this out, but I would love for someone to email me or like, you know, tweet at me and say, okay, here's exactly to the dollar how much Save the Tiger has made since 73.
Yeah.
I
I'd
would
be
love to know
curious.
that.
I would be curious. Yeah.
But
If anyone knows, let us know.
but yeah, so we should say a little bit about the story and just kind of the vibe of this
Sure.
movie. It's a very kind of it's you know, it's fairly simple in how it's laid out. It's just like it's kind of like a day in the life. What is it? A weekend in the life? How many days is this movie? 2?
Yeah, a day.
Is
or
it
two.
1?
I don't.
Yeah,
It might just be one day, honestly.
and I mean, it opens with Jack Lemmon getting out of bed, you know, ready for work. His wife is going on a trip, and they don't seem to have the greatest marriage. You know, there's a phone call later on that makes it seem like they had a really great first few years together, maybe, but now it's kind of stale. And he works at like this, it's like this fashion design center that he's in charge of, and they're having a lot of legal issues. So there's a lot of like, there's kind of like backstage kind of plot heavy elements of this movie that's just about him trying to keep the company afloat and how do they do this without going to jail. And there's that element. It's also just like a story of a guy who's clearly in like desperation mode, who's not very happy in his life, in his career. And so we're kind of seeing that spiral out of control through a series of events, including bumping into this young girl who he just, without thinking, just like picks up off the street, you know, in his car, and just gets to talking to her, and they have a night together. So it's kind of a midlife crisis story as well. But there's no big Oscar scene. There's no like third act action anything. It's just a very kind of quiet character study all the way through.
I completely agree. First of all, though, we have to note that Harry Stoner, one of the best names of all time. Just so good. So what's interesting about this film, I do think it's, you know, somewhat similar to what I was noting earlier with Vertigo. I think this is a film that plays much better now. Like I could see this film coming out today as it is and being really well reviewed critically. Now, I don't know if it would, I don't think it would be any different from an audience perspective. It probably still wouldn't make much money unless it's directed by, let's say, a Scorsese, you know, someone with a big name to it. And it stars Leonardo DiCaprio instead of Jack Lemmon. Like, you know, maybe that could, you know, change the financial tune of it all. But critically, I think this would be a really well-received movie because it is this somewhat bleak look at capitalism and the lengths people are willing to go to succeed and save their failing business. They're willing to go outside the bounds and having to, you know, maneuver through all of those threads to not only make it work, but also not get caught in the process. And so it's this really interesting look at capitalism in that, you know, through that prism. And it is kind of a dour movie. And I kind of respect the film for that. Like, I love that it's full bore into being a movie not tailor-made for conventionality.
Right.
And it I think does a really great job of committing to that tone all the way through. all the way through. And so, yeah, you're gonna watch this, and Harry Stoner isn't the most likable character. It doesn't end in a way that makes you feel great about the choices that these businessmen make. And also, you think about, let's say, the consequences or potential consequences at the end of this film, and you look at that through, let's say, the 2008 financial crisis and what happened there, and you're like, man, this is also a film that is somewhat ahead of its time in that way. Although I'm sure what happened in 2008 in terms of business leaders escaping, consequences, that was probably happening then too. But this was, I imagine, one of the first movies to tackle that directly and also this dourly. And Lemmon really commits to that, and I kind of liked the grimy nature of the film as a result.
Yeah, I feel like what kind of helps the downer nature of this movie is that we're watching a pretty big movie star at the time, Jack Lemmon, who was mostly, I mean, he did some dramas throughout the years that are famous, but I want to say come 72, 73, he might have been more known as a comedy actor than he was a dramatic actor. Especially this is coming right after Avanti by Billy Wilder, which is a comedy at the end of 72, which we just talked about a few months ago. So, and it's, boy, just polar opposite performances, because in Avanti, he's trying to make you laugh and it doesn't really work in that movie. It's not very good. And then here he's just he's just like playing a guy. He's not trying to get laughs out of the audience. And it was really refreshing in that regard. We haven't had nice things to say about Lemmon the last 2 years. He directed one movie in his life called Koch with Walter Matthau, and that's really terrible movie. It's bad. And I've never had a guest hate a movie more. It was a difficult hour for my guest.
Oh, I can imagine.
I was like, I'm sorry.
You made me watch this one? Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, I was like, Jack Lemmon directed a movie starring Walter Matthau in an Oscar-nominated role. I was like, we have to talk about this. Like, what's this all about? And it was so hard to find that movie. And then I later found out why, because it's like nobody's watching that one.
Terrible. Yeah.
And then Avanti is this pretty bloated 2.5 hour comedy by Billy Wilder that only works and fits and starts and here and there. It's okay, but it's not great. So this was this was nice to see Jack Lemmon in a really, really solid story, well told, and a fantastic performance all the way through, where he's not trying to make us laugh. He's just playing this guy who's really at a desperate stage in his life, and it just always feels very real. Like you can tell that he was passionate about this movie and wanted to do it justice. And I feel like some actors might have been, like, at the time, if this was like an Al Pacino or Jack Nicholson or something, I don't know. I do think Jack Lemmon was the right guy in a weird way for this character. Like he fits that role really well.
I completely agree. I think what comes to mind with his performance, because you noted earlier, there's really no Oscar-y moment here.
Yeah.
And I do love that. I mean, you and I talked about this a little bit when we did Chasing the Gold last week at InSession Film, that, the Academy a lot of times love those really loud, bombastic performances. They don't always go for subtlety.
Exactly.
And the thing I love about his performance here is that there is a grounded proficiency to it. There's really not much catharsis here, even when there's a moment of urgency, we'll say, without spoilers. I don't know if we're getting into spoilers or not.
Oh, we talk spoilers here. It's been 50 years.
Fair enough. So there's the moment with the prostitute where one of his clients has a heart attack, and there is an outburst there, but given the circumstance, it's understandable that he would react that way. But I don't think it's overly cooked. Like his performance does a great job of having this quick moment, this quick spurt where that urgency gets the best of him, but then he quickly internalizes what is happening. And you see his panic working internally, and so there's a nice little medium shot on Lemmon where you see his face doing all of the talking, not dialogue. And then immediately from there, you go to him at the show where he has a full on breakdown.
Right.
And
Which is a great scene.
While he's talking, his talking is just there to give the film, I guess, a little bit of energy. But what he's saying there doesn't matter. It is all on his face and how he is reverberating that panic. And again, there's a subtlety to it. There's a grounded realism to it that I just think is really fantastic.
Yeah, I love that scene where he's giving the speech and he starts off strong, and then he has this image in his head of seeing like all of these men in war. There's like a running theme throughout the movie, this idea of that. So he was a part of World War II, right? He tells her that 30 years ago I was in Italy during wartime. And so that also kind of runs throughout the movie, that he's kind of remembering that time and how things have changed. And so there's that great scene, and he doesn't say a full sentence for what, 20-30 seconds. Like he's just like kind of blubbering through and just he's starting to sweat a little bit. And we've all been there, right? I've had that moment in front of a group of people where I'm like, oh, I forgot what I was going to say. But so that felt real. That felt true. I like that.
I completely agree. And in this context, and I don't know how early, I'd have to do research on this, and I did not, so forgive me. But I mean, this has to be one of the earliest, certainly not the first, but one of the earliest to depict PTSD in that way. At least you could certainly make the case that's what's happening there. And yeah, I find that fascinating, that because of decisions he had made, because of his business and how that's failing, and how willing he is to go outside the bounds and the territory of what he should, that, you know, this client of his has this moment and he has to deal with it. And as a result, that there's probably something about what he's seeing and witnessing there as this client is, you know, having this heart attack, that triggers his PTSD. And this, you know, what's lingering from the war. And as you noted, it's not out of nowhere. The film had kind of built up that he, you know, is very nostalgic for the past. The opening scene of him is like, they don't play baseball like they did 30 years ago. You know, and he's constantly referencing that in the first act of the film.
He sees those kids running across the street at the beginning that has a payoff at the end.
Exactly.
And he's in the car.
Yes, exactly. So he's constantly reflecting on the past. And so you get to this moment where he's seeing death in front of him again, which then triggers his trauma from World War II. And it comes through so incredibly well. Like the film interweaves that incredible. And I love the timing of it, right, too, because it is one of the most pivotal moments of him trying to save his business. This is ultimately what the film is all about. But this whole notion of him reflecting on the past that now defines him in his life is almost undermining everything that he had done to build up his business to that point.
Right. Exactly. I think that I like that we're not getting long flashbacks that would have felt out of place. I like that
I agree.
Mostly just stay with him. And then he has some of these hallucinations, just brief ones that work really well. We should mention too, another great performance in the movie, also nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, is Jack Gilford as Phil Green. That's the was he just right under him at work? Like, I
think so, like his right-hand man.
And they spend a lot of scenes together. They have great banter. He's a nice addition so that the movie's not just Jack Lemmon by himself, like walking and talking to himself the whole movie. Yeah. Like he has some great, I love that part where they're arguing about like where to have lunch. And it goes on for like 45 seconds and Lemon's like, no, we're gonna go to Hong Kong. Like, I got this.
Chinatown, yeah.
But and then they go to that movie theater. Did you laugh when when he said 2 tickets, please? And she said that'll be $10. And he goes, $10.
So funny. $10.
That's a lot.
That. 2 for 10.
That's a lot of money in 73. Yeah. Like I remember as a kid, like in the mid to late 90s, a matinee was $5.
Yeah.
So but 73, that's a lot of money for a movie ticket.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from small town Michigan, and I remember like a full-fledged ticket being like $7.
Yeah,
like in the early 90s or in the mid 90s. Like, 'cause I remember when Titanic came out and it was like 11 and everyone was freaking out. Like,
Oh, they charged more?
I think so. I could be misremembering, but either way, like, it was like $7 or $8 when I was growing up, and now it's not unheard of that, what, every ticket is like 12, $13 or whatever. Like, if
Yeah,
you're going to see
in middle
Avatar and
school.
IMAX.
Oh yeah, like $20. Like middle school
Yeah.
and high school for a while, I remember it was $4.75, and I was like to my friend, I'd be like, "When's it gonna be 5?" Because they'd always like give me that quarterback, and that always felt kind of nice. And then one
Yeah.
day, it was maybe the first of the new year or something. It was suddenly 5, and then now
Yeah.
here we are. I'm going to see Avatar with my two brothers, and it's like $65
Yeah.
for
I
3
know.
tickets, and I'm like, "Whoa, wait a
It's
second."
wild. And and that's a whole nother rabbit hole you could get down to, right? Because that's why, the Babylons of the world struggle now because
Yeah,
people save their money to go see the
for
Top
the
Gun
big
Mavericks and Avatars
blockbusters.
instead. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because for me to take my wife and son, now I have AMC Movie Pass. Thank
Okay.
God for that. So, but even still to take them to, even if I'm not being charged, and then you're getting snacks and all, like, it's still 50, $60 at least. And
Yeah.
that's negating one ticket for 3 people. So, like, and then you have families of 4 and 5. I mean, you're looking at $180 to $100 to go to the theaters now. So
Yeah,
of
it was
course people
so
are going to
different.
wait.
It
Yeah, it's
was
so
so
different.
different 50 years ago because not only did you not have VHS, you didn't have videotape yet in 73. Like you didn't know once the movie left the theater if you'd ever see it again. Like that wasn't,
Exactly.
was that even in the
100%. Yeah.
consciousness of people in 73 that, oh, one day we might get to just rent all of these movies? I mean, that doesn't really come into being
Probably
until
not.
around 80, 81, I want to say. I mean, we're
Yeah,
still a few years out.
Exactly. I mean, because that's the thing with, again, if we're using Babylon as the example, people that are interested in that movie, I'm sure a lot of people are just like, oh, it'll be on Amazon
Right.
in 3 months. I'll just wait for it then. That's the
Yeah,
mentality now.
you have those like the hardcore like film fans like us who will go see it opening week or second week.
Yeah.
But a lot of the people who are in the middle who are interested in Babylon kind of want to see it, but they're like, do I want to take my wife or whoever, and it's, after popcorn and drinks, it's like we're at like $80, or we can wait 1 month and probably that'll be available to watch for free on one of our streaming services. That's what's so hard now. When you have, I mean, even the Fablemans, which opened, I want to say Thanksgiving weekend, and then within 3 weeks, it was like you have to pay $20, but you could just rent it at home. And it's like when there's only a few weeks, like a lot of people, including my dad, who's just like, I'm always like, you want to go see that? He's like, Brian, it'll be out in 3 weeks. I can just watch it then.
I know. Which and then it begs the question of how are we supposed to blame? And there's certainly nuance here. I do understand that, but if we're looking at it strictly from that perspective, there's certainly some understanding to be had as to why studios struggled to, greenlight a Babylon and those kinds of movies, unless you're Martin Scorsese and you've earned the right, or you're a Steven Spielberg, which makes it maybe all the more miraculous that Damien Chazelle, especially after First Man, still got greenlit for Babylon, because studios, these movies aren't making money. So of course they're going to struggle to greenlight that, and then we as cinephiles get frustrated because all we're seeing from studios are Marvel and DC, and
every week a new remake or a sequel.
We're getting Fast 10 this year. Like, I mean, how many Fast?
Someone shared a grid of all the big films from January to December of 23, and it was, I mean, looking at the biggest films of the year, it was like maybe 5 of them I'd be excited to see, I'd want to see, and the other ones I don't care about.
And look, I don't have anything against those franchises, because I've enjoyed the Fast and Furious movies. I've enjoyed Marvel. Like I don't have anything against it. I think the problem really comes down to that's all we get from studios, from the big studios. They're not giving one of that and then giving us something else like a Babylon. Like that ratio just does not even.
Yeah. And if you're
And
not in a giant city, sometimes it's hard to find this stuff. Like I was so
exactly. Yeah.
excited when one of my 5 theaters in Reno, Nevada got The Whale. And I had to
Yeah.
drive across town, but I'm like, thank God it's not
Yeah.
just Avatar on 27 screens. Like I've like this
Yeah.
one little screen across town that's playing The Whale. But like, I mean, we're recording this in early January, so I probably will have seen it by the time this drops. But After Sun and Women Talking have not come here, and I don't have access to those movies, and
Unless
it
you want to
bums
pay
me out.
$20 on Amazon.
20 bucks.
So, because right now
I guess I could do that.
They're at the priority level
right
of it. So, I mean, yeah. So, but like a normal rental price, you still have to wait a few weeks.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean,
whereas 50 years ago, I think Save the Tiger is playing all around the country. Like it's not like you have to go searching for it, even if it's not like the biggest movie out in theaters. Like I think that was a time where you had a big star in the lead role. Like that movie probably, even though it wasn't super popular, probably played for a couple months in theaters, and you could go find it if you wanted to.
Yeah. And
take the family to save the tiger.
Yeah, exactly.
Take the kids.
All of that to say that Jack Gilford is good here.
Yeah, but yeah,
the theater scene is fascinating.
I love that scene, and it's like, and then they sit like kind of like awkwardly next to this guy, and they're having a conversation with them, and we never see what's on the screen. It's just like kept, we get to use our imaginations, like what they're watching.
Yeah.
And I like the kind of the subtlety of the camera work in this movie. It's never in your face, never a shot that doesn't need to be there. It's just kind of like John Avildsen is the director who would later make Rocky and win an Oscar 3 years later. And he's just he's a good director of just like letting the story play out and not, showing too much of himself in the cinematography. I mean, I think that's what this movie needs.
It's a crisp 100 minutes too, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's well paced, it's well written, and I mean some nice subtle direction as well that complements the acting that we're seeing on screen and in the screenplay, which are its biggest strengths. So yeah, I mean, this is, it's hard to recommend, I guess, but because it is kind of bleak. But I mean, if you're into those kind of movies about, because this is trying to tackle something that not many movies are willing to tackle. I mean, even these days, when you think of something like The Wolf of Wall Street or The Big Short, those movies are overtly taking something, speaking of business, that on its own terms can be banal, and we're making it outrageous. Like we're going
very stylish,
extreme, very stylish, and consumable. This is not doing that. This is taking business drama, and there is some interesting, compelling drama here, but they're doing it so pragmatically that it's not going to grab everyone's attention. I mean, you really have to be drawn into the performances and the psychology of this film. And I do love that. Like I'm very much for those kinds of movies. So it did work for me, even if it is maybe a little banal in some places. But I mean, I mean, I'll take that any day over the week over, the conventionality of another version of, like, there's another version of this that's less complicated and more, we are going to have a happy ending here.
Oh, that would have felt really wrong.
I agree.
If he was smiling at the end and saying, calling his wife and saying, "You know what, honey, I love you. Let's be happy together."
Yeah, exactly.
He has like a smile on his face when he throws the baseball, and that kid's like, "What are you doing, man?" He like throws it across the whole field, and he's like, "I just wanted to show you what I could do." Or what does he say to him?
Yeah. No, I love that. And I love that it's willing to give Harry all of these layers. I mean, not only does he engage in shady business practices, but we do see that he has a strained relationship with his wife, or at least it's muted, it's stale. And then you couple that with these two scenes he has with this young woman that he picks up in his car. It's like, man, there's a lot going on with Harry, and it's fascinating to see how he reacts to all of these things in front of him.
And she says, "Do you want a ball?" That's what she says to
Yeah.
him.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
like, were you kind of like freaked out? Like, so he picks her up the second time at night, and they go back and get in bed, and he's like got his shirt off, and she's like giving him a massage, and I'm like, how well does he know this girl?
Not at all.
I'm like, man, that's really like, I don't like, she could like smack you across the face and take all your money, and I mean, how do you don't know this person at all?
And maybe that also speaks to the culture of the time. Like it's just different than it is now because I mean, that scenario today is, they're definitely stealing all of your stuff if you're picking up strangers like that. You know, so
and I read online Sissy Spacek auditioned for that role. They went with Sissy Spacek's first film we talked about last year called Prime Cut, came out in the summer of 72, and then her second film, I believe, is Badlands. That's fall of 73. So she's not quite like, we don't really, the world doesn't know her yet, so I understand that, but she would have made an interesting choice for that role.
I agree. No, that would have been fun. Yeah,
Sissy and Jack, who aren't they in a movie? I think they're in a movie called Missing from 82. I think they did a film together later.
Okay.
So it worked out.
Ended up working out.
The universe, I think they might have both gotten Oscar nominations for Missing from 82. So there you go. But so a solid supporting cast, but outside of Lemmon, I didn't really recognize anyone else in the movie. Jack Gilford looked sort of familiar. I'm like, I feel like I've seen him in something. There was something about his face that I recognized, maybe when he was younger or something. But it's just it's a quiet character piece. It's not a movie that it's over and you're like, I'm going to tell everyone I know that you have to watch this. Like, it's not that kind of movie. I feel like that if you're an Oscar completist, like you have to see it because it won the Academy Award for Lemmon. I feel like if you are even just a casual fan of the work of Jack Lemmon, I think this movie is essential. Like, you have to see this one. He didn't make a ton of dramas. Like Days of Wine and Roses from 62 is a drama. I believe he got an Oscar nomination for that. And The Apartment is kind of more of a drama in a way than it is comedy. It's kind of a mix of the two. But I would say most people think of him as a comedy actor. And this is kind of an interesting kind of offbeat performance for him. That's really interesting. So I would recommend it to people who just have maybe a casual interest in the career of Lemmon.
Yeah, no, I would first and foremost recommend it for his performance. I mean, you noted earlier that he really wanted to get this made.
Yeah.
So despite the tone of it being maybe a little bit different for him, he knew what he wanted to do. Excuse me. Being a little bit different for him, he knew what he wanted to do with the character, and it comes through so vividly in his performance. So yeah, really, really great stuff. I definitely recommend it for him, but anyone that's interested in these kind of complicated, dour, thematically nuanced movies about the American dream and how it's not always roses.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely would recommend it for those that are interested in that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So critics at the time were kind of mixed on it. Most of them liked it so, but they really praised Lemmon's performance. That probably kept that performance alive throughout the rest of the year for Oscar consideration. As of now, it has an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes with 27 reviews. So most people like it, at least, if not love it.
Yeah.
And what a Vincent Canby of the New York Times, he called it not a very good movie, but it's a brave one, a serious-minded examination of some of the least interesting aspects of the failed American dream. that was a good way to put it. But
sure.
So I mean, it was like, it wasn't very successful. Critics weren't like going crazy about it. It makes sense to me that this movie could have been overlooked the next Oscar season.
Yeah.
Like, it would have, like, the movie's quiet enough and it came out in February that it kind of surprises me that it hung on that long and won Jack Lemmon the Oscar. There's not, as you say, there's not really one scene in the movie that's like, whoa, like, we gotta give this guy an Oscar.
No, and like today, like, I'm trying to think of like a comparison today, like maybe something like, what was it, 2014, like A Most Violent Year, which has some terrific performances
Yeah.
that are really great, fantastic direction, but it comes out around the same time. Like it's like this February release,
Well,
because
so
it's
that
one of
came
those like
out.
post-Oscar.
Well, that came out at the very end of 2014 in limited, and then I
In
think
limited, but
yeah,
most people didn't catch up with
yeah,
it until its wider release, like later in January or February.
right.
So like it's one of those movies where, it comes out, people like it,
Mm-hmm.
it's well reviewed, but by the end of the year, I don't think anyone was talking about it except me because it was in my top 10. But
Well, it was in my top 10, but that's a different case because that came out at the end of 2014. And I think the problem with that movie was that it broke too late. Like, it's one of those films, like, I just watched The Pale Blue Eye with Christian Bale, and I'm like, there's some interesting things about this film. If it came out in like October, like maybe it could have had a chance, but boy, it's just right at the end here. Whereas Save the Tiger was a year before, like they were even voting. Like that had been out for 12 plus months before they started voting for the Oscars. A Most Violent Year
wild.
was one of those where if that had come out 3 or 4 months earlier, like maybe it could have picked up some steam. Because occasionally get these years with like a Get Out from 2017 or Silence of the Lambs in 91, where they break very, very early in the year, but they hang on. And that somehow happened with Save the Tiger. My theory is a big reason why he won is that he's so popular and he hadn't won yet for Best Actor. And he'd been nominated a few times before for Best Actor.
Mm-hmm.
And it had been, I think 18 years since he won Best Supporting Actor for Mr. Roberts in 55, 56. So I think it was one of those years where there wasn't a clear front runner. It wasn't like the year before where Marlon Brando wins for The Godfather and nobody was beating him for that. I don't think.
Yeah.
Like if Save the Tiger had come out a year before, I don't think Jack Lemmon beats Marlon Brando for The Godfather. But this happens once, I want to say every 5 to 6 years, there's a year where there's just not like a consensus choice. And so he's up against some really heavy hitters, but I don't know if any one of them was like the easy win of any kind. We have Marlon Brando for Last Tango in Paris, which we just talked about a few weeks ago. And that film also came out in February of 73. Marlon Brando won a year before for The Godfather, so they weren't going to give him 2 in a row.
No.
And then Robert Redford for The Sting, which is kind of a cool nomination. That's his only Oscar nomination for acting in his entire career. He gets nominated one other time and wins Best Director for Ordinary People.
Yeah.
But is Robert Redford, like, is everyone clamoring to give him an Oscar for The Sting? I don't think so. Like, it's like a good performance, but it's not like, a clear favorite. And then we have Al Pacino for Serpico, which I love. That's a great movie, great performance. But it's right after The Godfather. He's still a very new actor. I don't know if they're like ready to give him anything yet. And then Jack Nicholson for The Last Detail. That would have been my choice because that is an amazing performance he gives. But then if he had won for Last Detail, he might not have won for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest 2 years later, which I think is like his landmark performance. So it all worked out.
Yeah, it all worked out. And it's interesting how the Academy works in that way, right? Where they're like, oh, this person won a year ago or 2 years ago. So, maybe we'll give it to someone else, and again, tailoring it to this year, like, is Cate Blanchett going to win a third time? Maybe. I see a lot of comments saying that it's not even close. And yes, she's going to win.
By the time this episode drops, we'll just be 2-3 weeks away from the ceremony. And I sometimes I think I overthink it. I'm like, Cate Blanchett's already won twice. So Michelle Yeoh is in this beloved movie. This might be the only chance we have to give Michelle Yeoh an Academy Award in Best Actress. So, but then it's like, sometimes I overthink it. I was thinking about Frances McDormand for Nomadland, and I was like, she can't possibly win a third time. It's not going to happen. I wouldn't even let it enter my brain. I'm just like, they're not going to do that. She just won for 3 billboards, and then they did. So that throws that out, and I'm like, oh, Cate Blanchett is so stunningly great in Tar that I'm like, she might be good enough in this movie for her to get a third. Like, it just might happen. And we'll just be like, oh, we were overthinking it the whole time. It was always going to be Blanchett.
And that I've seen that floating around, and I'm not going to be against Cate Blanchett winning awards, especially for that performance.
Yeah.
It's
been 9 years since Blue Jasmine, so it's been a while.
It has been a while, but Michelle Yeoh hasn't been in this situation before. And who's to say that she's going to find herself in this situation in the near future? We don't know. I don't know if that's top of mind for voters or where they're going to go.
Sometimes I wonder if they don't think. I wonder if voters don't think about that as much of like, sometimes I think they just look at the performances and that's it.
And maybe that's it. Yeah.
They're not overthinking.
And to the Jack Lemmon thing, maybe, I guess kind of fundamentally, perhaps this is sort of the same, even though the circumstances is different. But as you noted, Lemmon isn't really known for a dramatic actor.
Mm-hmm.
So
that might have impressed
maybe
them.
The thinking is, what if this is his only opportunity to give that kind of performance?
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and give him the win here. Maybe that was the thinking.
So in between his wins for Mr. Roberts and Save the Tiger, he'd been nominated for Best Actor 3 times. I always forget this. He was nominated for Best Actor in a leading role for Some Like It Hot.
Yeah.
The comedy Some Like It Hot. He got an Oscar nomination for that in lead.
Very different performance.
That's wow. I forget that he got nominated for that. I know he was nominated for The Apartment in 1961, and I think he came pretty close to winning that one. I believe it went to Burt Lancaster for Elmer Gantry, and then he's nominated 2 years after that for Days of Wine and Roses, and now it's been about 11 years since his last nomination. I watched the clip on YouTube. The Academy Awards, if you're an Academy Awards buff, like it's all on YouTube, man. It's like they have everything. And I watched Jack Lemmon's acceptance speech. First off, when they call his name, he does like this like huge like head back like cheer that you don't really see often, especially like men and lead actor. Usually they just stand up and smile. Like he like goes, yes. Like you can tell he wanted this. Like he was excited. And then he goes up and the first thing he says is, well, I wrote a speech back in 1959 that I didn't end up using. Nice, so yeah. I don't have one right now, but let me just, and it's a beautiful couple minute speech. And I'm so happy that that happened for him because he's nominated 3 more times over the next 10, 15 years for the China Syndrome, Tribute, and Missing. And he doesn't win again. So this was the year for him. So I'm happy that happened. Yeah, and then the one other thing about his win is that he became the first person to win Oscars in supporting actor and lead actor. He was the first one to do that, which kind of surprised me that no one else accomplished that before 1974.
Oh, wow.
He became one of 6 to date. The only one I know off the top of my head, Denzel Washington did it for Glory and Training Day. And then Kevin Spacey did it for Usual Suspects and American Beauty. And then there's 3 other ones. I'm sure if I thought about it, I could think of them. But so that's kind of neat. He was the first one to accomplish that. And then Jack Gilford was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. He was up against Vincent Gardenia for Bang the Drum Slowly, Jason Miller for The Exorcist. I always forget Jason Miller got a nomination for that movie. That's really cool. Randy Quaid's only Oscar nomination for The Last Detail. And the winner was John Houseman for The Paper Chase. I don't know anything about The Paper Chase, but because it won that big Oscar, we're going to talk about it later this year. And we'll see what the fuss is all about with John Houseman.
Okay.
You know those movies at all? Like, have you seen The Last Detail with Nicholson and Randy Quaid?
I have seen The Last Detail, and it's been a while. I remember liking that movie.
Yeah, I saw it in college, and it's wild. Like
it is.
Is it Nicholson's most profane performance? Like if I remember right, it's just probably. Like every scene he's just going off, and it's a big performance. Kind of surprised.
I remember really liking Randy Quaid a lot in it.
It was like Jason one of Randy Quaid's first films.
Yeah. Of course, Jason Miller's great in The Exorcist.
Have you heard of The Paper Chase? I don't know anything.
I have not seen that one. I was going to say that's a blind spot. I'm going to be curious to hear you guys talk about that later. So, yeah.
And then the third Oscar nomination it got was for original screenplay from screenwriter Steve Shagan. That was up against American Graffiti, Cries and Whispers, A Touch of Class. The winner was The Sting, which went on to win Best Director and Best Picture. Yeah. I've
Yeah.
seen The Sting one time in high school. I don't remember it at all. So we're getting to that in November, December. I'm excited to revisit The
Yeah.
Sting. I don't really remember it.
Yeah, that's a film that I really liked the first time I saw it, but another one of those college movies. I haven't seen that in 20 years probably.
Yeah.
But I at the time I really liked it. American Graffiti also very good. Cries and Whispers, I'm shocked that got a nomination here because Bergman's writing is kind of, it's
I've never
Bergman,
seen Cries
but
and Whispers, and it's coming up here in I think 3 weeks. We were talking that movie, so I'm
it's
curious to see what the fuss is about that one.
I mean, I do like it. It's maybe a little bit more attainable, I guess, than some of his other work,
Mm-hmm.
compared to something like Persona, for example.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I do like it. Of these nominees here, I mean, Cries and Whispers might be my favorite of these
Okay.
films, but that could just be my Bergman bias coming through there. So
But I do find it interesting. I feel like this movie, Save the Tiger, it could have just been a one-off nomination for Jack Lemmon, and just that was
yeah,
it.
it could have been,
Like
yeah.
a still Alice Julianne Moore kind of thing. Like we're just
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
the movie was fine, but we loved the big name in the lead role. We'll give it to you. That they nominated the secondary actor and the screenplay shows that the movie did have some enthusiasm in the
Yeah.
Academy a year
Yeah.
later. So that says something
Yeah.
about
A
the
year
quality
later.
of the film.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
The film also got 3 Golden Globe nominations: Best Actor, Supporting Actor, and Best Motion Picture Drama. And the film won the WGA Award for Best Drama Written Directly for the Screen. So that's a big prize for the film too. That's probably
Yeah.
also helped get it into the Oscar
Yeah.
nomination for
There you
Best
go.
Screenplay.
Yeah. So the Globes
So
aren't always useless, just most of the time.
yeah, exactly. So that kind of wraps up our discussion of Save the Tiger. Is there any last words you wanted to say about the movie? Like, what would you give it? Like a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10? Like, I'd give it like a 6.5 out of 10, maybe.
Yeah, I'd give it like a B plus.
B
I think.
plus.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's well told. It's obviously well performed. Like I said, pretty sharp in terms of its pacing. Very, against the grain. Regarding its commentary, and I really do respect it and admire that.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it's good. The reason I bring up something like A Most Violent Year, and maybe that's a bad comparison, but I think of like the way people, like, the overarching response to that film was kind of muted. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the sense of what I see with this film in terms of like, yeah, it's good. But I don't know if it, like, I don't think this film would be making a lot of top 10 lists, I guess is what I'm saying. And
Yeah,
and
it's
so,
like people will be respectful of it. They admire it, but they're not raving about it.
exactly. But then for it to last a year, as you're saying, I mean, is impressive for a film of that caliber. But maybe that just speaks to the year and the crop of these films. I don't really know, but
that's kind of how it works sometimes. Is there just wasn't a front runner, or there wasn't like a big performance that they were going to award, and they were like, well, we've given Lemmon a few nominations throughout the years without a win and lead, let's give it to him this year. That seems like
what would
happened.
you personally say was the best film of that year?
Of 73?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, we're just starting the year on the podcast. I'd have to think.
Oh,
like,
so I'm getting ahead of myself. Never mind.
Like ask me
curious.
that.
Okay.
Ask me that in December, and I'll have a good answer for you.
We'll circle back to the
I
second
mean,
of the year.
will anything beat The Exorcist? That's one of the great horror films of all time. I'm excited to revisit it and talk about it later this year. Yeah. I will be surprised if a movie I've never seen before from 73 beats that film. But there's some here, like The Sting, which I don't remember that well. American Graffiti I saw once in high school, and I don't remember that as well either. So there's gonna be, I mean, there's Mean Streets. There's some good stuff in the fall. Movie? There's what is that one with I mean, there's some like big titles coming up in like October, November. Oh, Don't Look Now with Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland. That's really great, kind of a horror film.
Are you going to be covering The Long Goodbye?
Yep, Long Goodbye. We are recording that in a couple weeks. I've got a friend from college. I have not talked to her in 10 plus years.
keep that queued up. Then I'm going to be real excited
I have
for
never seen
that
The
one.
Long Goodbye. I'm very excited.
Yeah,
That's what makes this podcast fun. Is a lot of the time I haven't seen it,
yeah,
but I know of it, and this just
yeah,
like literally forces me to watch it.
yeah. No,
Like I
I
don't know
love
if I
that.
would have
Yeah,
sat and watched Save the Tiger if not for this. I might have been like, I'll get to that, and
yeah,
then just forget. But this one, I'm like,
yeah.
nope, I got to talk about it. Let's watch it.
It is exciting. No, I love that. That's what we like at InSession Film. We do these various movie series.
Yeah, like the
You
director
know,
series.
exactly. And a lot of the time, you either revisit films and find surprises, or
Mm-hmm.
they resonate with you in a whole new way, or there are movies that you haven't seen before or don't remember much, and
Mm-hmm.
then it just ends up being this transcendent experience that you're like, oh my god.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's fun. It is very rewarding. So I
and
definitely feel you.
I feel like it's worth it to just find 5 to 10 surprises throughout the year, 5 to 10 movies that I adore
Yeah.
that I might not have watched without this. It just makes it all worth it, and it's a lot
Yeah.
of fun. But so yeah, that's Save the Tiger. I think we both liked it. I think it's worth a watch if you're a fan of Jack Lemmon's. I think it's kind of essential viewing, and it's a really strong central performance. He's the movie. Like he's in. Is there a scene in this movie without him? I feel like he's in every scene.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
So if you like Jack Lemmon at all, it's worth a look. I think it's
Yeah,
an interesting
I
film.
agree.
All right, so
No,
that
I
takes
agree.
us to our final two segments. The first one is the Divine Double Feature. This is where we pick a modern film to pair with our 70s movie. Like, what's a more recent film that you think would make an interesting double feature with our film today, Save the Tiger?
See, now that's a really good question. And I was trying to think of, for context for listeners out there, I just watched this a few hours ago. So
Yeah.
this is pretty top of mind. So when it comes to, these business movies, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind to me, and maybe this isn't the most apt comparison, but the first one that came to mind to me was something like Steve Jobs,
Mm-hmm.
because I think of the psychology of that movie, and also its central performance. It's very driven by its central performance. And while the business of it isn't, I mean, it's almost antithetical, right? Because Apple isn't about the failed American dream.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, it is the opposite. But you think about Steve Jobs and him, like his fight for the business still resonates. And maybe
Right.
that's why it came to mind, right? Because like what you see in Save the Tiger, he's having to save the apple, like at least from his perspective, right? Because he's having to fight the board. At one point, they kick him out, and so there are some parallels there, even if fundamentally they're kind of looking at the American dream differently. The journey is kind of ish the same. So that was the first one that came to mind for me, versus other movies. I'm trying to think of other movies that we've seen that are business minded, and a lot of them I don't know how much they compare when you think of something like The Social Network or even The Wolf of Wall Street. Maybe there's some comparisons. Steve Jobs, though, is the one that feels the most apt.
The Danny Boyle one with Kate Winslet,
Yeah.
Michael Fassbender. Oh yeah, that's a good film.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that choice.
Yeah.
So part of me wanted to recommend Life of Pi because I feel like there would be some people watching Save the Tiger sad by the end when they realize there's no tiger. Which we didn't even talk about the title. It is kind of a strange title. Like, and it's referenced a lot. It's like that meme of Leonardo DiCaprio pointing in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood of like when you're watching a movie that has a weird title and then you hear the title in dialogue, Save the Tiger.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, there it is.
Yeah, I joked about it earlier. It's certainly symbolic of his business, I guess.
Yeah.
And so if there is levity here, I guess it's there. Like,
and it also made me think of like, were there audience members in early 73 who only knew Jack Lemmon from comedies who went into this movie not realizing it was a drama?
Yeah.
Because the title could be like a wacky comedy set at a zoo, right?
Yeah.
Starring Jack Lemmon.
Absolutely. And
if you didn't see the trailer.
But you look at it from his perspective, because an activist movement like that, Save the Tigers, is going to come from a passionate place for those people. And with his business, that is his mindset. So, metaphorically, I do think there is purpose to it, but it is somewhat humorous with how odd it is.
When he gets it, when they call out his name as the Oscar winner, it's like Jack Lemmon, Save the Tiger. It's like what is this title? It's kind of strange. But no, so my choice was, I was trying to think of like a best actor Oscar win of the last decade where the tone of the movie felt kind of similar. And I went with Manchester by the Sea. Which won Casey Affleck the Oscar for Best Actor. And that's also a really kind of quiet, moving, emotional character study of someone who's in kind of a desperate, bad place in their life. And I've only seen it the once because it was a tough watch. I remember just it being very very dour is the word you used earlier, and sad and but very well written, made, great acting in it. Michelle Williams has this incredible scene towards the end that I've never forgotten. And
I can't beat it. That line will forever haunt me. Forever haunt me.
Which line?
I can't beat it.
Oh, I can't beat it.
That moment in that film. And again, and maybe this is where it is a pretty good comparison, because we talked earlier about kind of the grounded realism and subtlety of his performance. And that's what's so incredible to me about Casey Affleck there, is that could have easily have been more, I don't know, more schmaltzy or more Oscar-y. There's a version of him delivering that line that feels like a big Oscar moment. Yeah. But it's very quiet. There's no music. The camera is still. There's nothing really happening except focusing it on him. And he just delivers that line with this incredible weight, but it's all internalized. Yeah. It just says it so quietly. So I don't know. It destroyed me though. It absolutely.
So it wouldn't be the most fun night at the movies.
It's definitely not, but a great movie though.
But to see some, I feel like there's some similarities to the kind of understated lead performance and kind of the character study element of it, that it would be interesting to see how have films changed from 73 to 2016 and get a glimpse of that. I think that's a terrific film too. Our final segment, Beyond the Flick, we're talking the career of Mr. Jack Lemmon. So if you could only take 3 of his movies to a desert island, what are 3 of his films you've seen that you think are really great?
I mean, I hate to be a walking cliche, but his work with Billy Wilder
is great. Yeah.
Is so good. Some Like It Hot and The Apartment especially are all time.
Yeah.
They're so good. So it's hard to deny those films.
Yeah, those are on my list too.
Yeah. So I mean, I hate to be take the obvious choices, but I mean, I could watch both of those films constantly and never get tired of them.
Yeah.
So
brilliantly written and acted, and his chemistry with the other actors, with Tony Curtis and Marilyn Monroe and Some Like It Hot, and then with Shirley MacLaine in The Apartment. It's so great. How he works with other actors in those movies.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as far as a third goes, I mean,
is there anything else that hits you?
Well, yes, but I don't know how prominent. There's a couple of films on here where he's not as prominent than, let's say, those Billy Wilder films.
Hamlet.
Because if I'm looking at something just the film itself, I think of something like Shortcuts.
Shortcuts is great. Yeah, that's on my runners up.
So maybe that's the film you go with. Or if I'm looking at it a little nostalgically, and because I was born in 85, right?
Okay, so we're close.
Grumpy Old Men is a movie that I kind of grew up on. My parents loved that, and I would watch it with them.
My grandparents took me to that movie when I was 9 or whenever that came out.
Yeah, exactly. I was about the same, I think, when I saw it, maybe 10.
And I thought the sequel was better. Grumpy Old Men.
Yeah. So there's a nostalgia factor there where I find those films so charming and hilarious that maybe that's what I go with. Yeah. Even though, I mean, there's certainly quote unquote better movies in his filmography, but I don't know. Maybe it's the wilder work. And one of Shortcuts or Grumpy Old Men. Maybe that's where I'm at.
Are you sad we never got a grumpiest old man?
Yeah, you got to round out that trilogy, right?
Odd Couple 2, we get a 30 years later sequel, The Odd Couple 2, and then we don't get a 3.
Yeah.
So they're making these sequels but not completing the trilogy. What's that about?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
It was interesting at the very that's right, he's in The Player. At the very end of his career, he worked with Walter Matthau often, but that last decade, he's like almost every movie's with Walter Matthau. I remember being confused when My Fellow Americans came out, and I was like, wait, that other actor's not Walter Matthau, it's James Garner. I was so just familiar with those two as like a cinematic pair in movies, like so often. They're even both in JFK together, but like not together, but like they're in that movie.
And earlier we mentioned that he was up against, I believe you mentioned he was up against Robert Redford when he was up for Best Actor for Save the Tiger, correct?
Yes.
And then his last film, although uncredited, was with Robert Redford
as director.
As a director. Yeah.
The Legend of Bagger Vance comes out in, I believe, November of 2000, and then Jack Lemmon passes away in the summer of 2001. Yeah. And I tried to watch that movie once, and it was really boring, and I don't think I ever finished it.
Yeah,
he was the narrator, either. And I guess he has a cameo at the end.
Yeah.
His last screen appearance, he has a brief moment at the end of the film. But
comes full circle.
Here. So some other films we didn't mention I think are great. Days of Wine and Roses I saw once when I was younger. I remember that was really terrific. I think it's an alcoholism drama, like it's a good drama. And then The Odd Couple from '68 would be very close to my top 3. That's a great film. Have you seen the original Odd Couple?
I love The Odd Couple. Yeah,
that's a fun one.
Well.
And then The China Syndrome from '79 with Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas is a great movie. That was
going to be another one I was going to bring up. If I didn't go the nostalgia route or just Shortcuts because it's great.
So I've seen that.
That might be my third too. Yeah.
And he got an Oscar nomination for that. Missing is also very good. The movie I mentioned with Sissy Spacek from '82. I saw that once. The only Oscar nomination he got I have not seen is for a film called Tribute from 1980. I don't know that film.
Yeah.
But I've seen the other one.
For me too. Yeah.
But if I had to pick my third favorite, one we haven't mentioned, I think so. His last Oscar nomination is in '83 for Missing. I think he was worthy of one more Oscar nomination a decade later for his supporting performance in Glengarry Glen Ross. Have you seen that film with Alec Baldwin and Kevin Spacey?
Yeah, love that one. Yeah,
Al Pacino. That was a weird year. Al Pacino gets double nominated that year, and lead actor for Scent of a Woman, and then supporting actor for Glengarry Glen Ross. And I think, why couldn't we have given Pacino just the lead nomination for Scent of a Woman, and then instead of nominating Pacino again for supporting for Glengarry Glen Ross, like I think the strongest performance in that movie is by Jack Lemmon. He's really moving in that film. Like he is. Talk about desperate. Like he's just like, it's a really desperate, very strong performance he gives that you don't see a whole lot from him in the '90s. Like he's good in Shortcuts in a dramatic role. But I feel like his best dramatic role towards the end of his career for a theatrical feature film was Glengarry Glen Ross. It was a really strong piece of work. I like that movie.
Yeah. I really love that movie as well. It's really great. I know you mentioned it earlier, Mr. Roberts, the John Ford film. Did you like that one?
Yeah, no, I liked it. It's in my runners up. It's Henry Fonda's the lead. I did a few years ago. I didn't see everything, but I watched most of John Ford's work. I had only seen 3 of his movies. And so I did a year of just kind of going through his filmography. Every few weeks I'd watch something. And Mr. Roberts was kind of a unique film for him. It didn't have the feel of like The Searchers or
it's definitely
or Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more like comedic in tone. It's got a big ensemble cast and
the cast is great.
It's a great cast, and Jack Lemmon, it was like his breakthrough. Like I think he was in a few movies before that, but that was the movie that kind of put him on the map. So in a way, that'd almost be a good choice too to watch if you wanted to see like 3 or 4 of Jack Lemmon's films and you haven't seen Mr. Roberts. It's kind of worth seeing. It won him an Oscar, and it was kind of his breakthrough, so that's worth checking out too.
I agree.
All right, so that takes us to the end here, JD. Thanks for being on Film at 50 for the first time. As we wrap up here, I'd love for you to talk about where our listeners can find you online, and if there's anything you'd like to promote, now would be the time.
Yeah, so the easiest way to find us is at InSession Film. So what all do we do there? So we have we have 2 different shows, although structure of the podcast might be changing. But as it is right now, we have the main show that we do. We have another show called Extra Film. And that one is very director series driven. But we also have a Women in Session podcast that is a panel of females. We have a lot of written content at the site as well. As of recording, so when this comes out, our award show will already be released and available to the public. But I do encourage you to go back and check out our award show for 2022 because it is one of the biggest shows we do all year. It is 37 hours of podcasting.
Oh my God.
But it is a lot of fun. It is broken up into 2 parts where we do our awards talking about best director and actor and all that sort of stuff. And then part 2 is our best picture, if you will. We talk about our top 10 movies of the year. So we're getting set to record that, and it is always a blast. I can foresee the future, and it is maybe the best award show we've ever done. So definitely encourage everyone to go and check that out. And again, the easiest way to find everything is InSessionFilm.com. And you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere, basically. Just search InSession Film, you'll find us.
Yeah, we love InSession Film around here. I don't think I've mentioned I write for InSession Film. It's a fantastic site. Would have happened by now. You guys sent me to Sundance, which is like a dream. It's so fantastic. So yeah, we adore InSession Film. Go check it out and watch the podcast, listen to the podcasts, and read all the reviews and the writing there. It's a great
check
site.
out Brian's work. Definitely go read it.
So thank you, JD, for being here. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Twitter and Instagram. Check out my YouTube channel, Brian Rowe Video, for all things Oscar. Maybe I'll do a video about Jack Lemmon down the line. We shall see. And until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.